Okay guys, so in this video I'm going to show you how to create a batch job to send emails. But before we start looking into the specific of this, we need to ask kind of why would we do this using a batch job? Well, the honest answer is that it kind of depends. I've thought that showing you this will give you a bit of an insight into the sort of performance considerations that you may want to make in the future. If you only have a system that is used by a few people, like in this application, there's no real reason to start off doing this sort of, I'm not going to call it over engineering, but it's something that you will have to think about when you do very heavy computations in the future. You may also have a use case, and a good example is, let's say that we wanted to in the future support to send emails at a given interval. Let's say that we want to support a feature where we allow our user to say that, hey, I want this email to be sent at a given time, not now, but later. Then we would have to have some type of way of evaluating continuously if that timer has actually been reached. And a batch job that runs on a schedule of some sort is a very good way of doing that. Another good consideration is if you have a lot of users, like we're talking maybe thousands and thousands and millions of users all sending emails all the day, all the time, right? If you are sending a email on every single time, like every single time, whenever a user requests it, it's going to be pretty heavy for your systems to do that. And you might want to be able to scale the dispatching of the email, because the thing is, a user really only needs to see that, hey, an email has been dispatched, and it doesn't have to happen instantaneously, it just has to happen pretty, in a short amount of time, if you will, in a very recent, in a soon to come future, if you will. So what I'm going to show you now is a way to approach this problem. So what we've done here is, let's just close down all this stuff. We kind of need this now. So I have this little batch job that I've started. We'll look at that in just a moment. And basically all it is that it is just a bunch of prints out here where we send an email. We can actually close this down here, and I can actually run this job. So we're starting this job, and it's going to go and start, and then it's going to log out. Wait for it. And there it is, sent 0 emails. All right, so this is fairly trivial, but what happens if I do something like this? Let's say I created this little email here, yada yada, and then I click send, and email failed, unauthorized, because hey, I have lost my session since the last time I did this, which is great. Let's log in again, let's try that again. Let's do this thing here. We're gonna send an email to this person. And then we hit send, and email was successfully sent. And now we go back and we can see, hey, sent 1 emails, and then we sent 0 emails. So if we look at the script here, send emails. So what this script is doing is that it's basically connecting us to our Mongoose instance, like hooking up to the database, and then I have an email, our email service is just on an interval. So every 5 seconds we are going to set some type of limit, and then we're just going to try to dispatch emails. Like, we can actually look at the actual implementation of this. So if we have a look here, we will see that, let's actually go to the actual file here, because we need to have a little bit of space here. Let's do that later. Remind me tomorrow, because hey, I'm a busy guy. So send emails is going to take in a limit, and then it's going to go and find all the emails that are of type outgoing, and not more than the limit, because remember, if we have millions and millions of users, and we have the dispatching of all those emails is going to take quite a while. So we have to chunk it out somehow, so not to overstress our system, because it's not going to be economically feasible for us to have like a supercomputer or like a massive supercluster where everybody can just dispatch emails all the time when there's that many people doing it. So we want to batch it somehow, or somehow like lessen the load, because as I said, it's not a hard requirement for us to send the email immediately. So what we're then going to do is that we are going to go map through all the emails to send, and we're going to use something called email service provider. Now, this kind of depends. Like in our little application here, like we would probably use a third party like MailChimp or Mandrill or some other service that actually dispatches the actual email or receives the email, so on and so forth, because being our own host for that sort of thing is a little bit tedious. I'll just show you this fake little service I made. All it's going to do is that, it doesn't do anything. It's just faking the actual network request. And this is where you would put, if you were to do this live and you were to actually make the integration, this is where you would put all the API specific code, but it's not really important for our learning purposes. But it's like a service provider like this would just represent the actual integration, but you don't want to put that in your email service because you might have like several service providers, or you might have a bunch of very application like in API specific integration logic, and there's no reason for you to like pollute your own business logic with that. So adding that into a specific service provider, I think that's nice. And then you, as we could see here, all you're really doing here is that you are abstracting away that and using that network call internally like that. That's about it, really. So what we're going to now get is a bunch of promises that's going to come back, and then we do a for auth loop. And the reason why we want to do this is because we want to dispatch asynchronously all these emails to our service provider, or to our whoever's going to actually dispatch the email to the end user. And we want to do that regardless of whether it works or not. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to wait for the promise. And when this has been resolved, in other words, the network request is finished, we are going to we're going to go and find that email by ID again in the database and set the type to sent, and then we're just going to resave it because now the email has been successfully dispatched. But if there's an error, let's say that there's a problem with the email, it can't be dispatched, or something goes wrong, then hey, we want to maybe think about, okay, should we send a email, like show an error message to the email, or send a error email to the user who actually tried to dispatch this email. That's a later topic, but that's something you could add in, so that you may have noticed this if you use Gmail, like if an email actually fails delivery, you don't actually see an alert immediately when you send the email. You get a email sent back to you which states that this failed. And that's exactly what we're going for here, because this is the sort of structure. It's very likely that they use, or this is of course a basic example, but this is the basic idea of having this not immediate delivery or immediate response, rather having a delay on things in order to actually lower the cost of having of the system just a little bit. There are other considerations, of course, as well, but this is one of the primary ones. So then we have the question, all right, if let's say we have a very small system, let's say that it's an internal, like let's say fmail was this little application that we built for a handful of clients. Maybe they're like 30 people tops who's going to use this for real. Then we would probably do this, like sending the email immediately, like immediately dispatching it might be the way to go. So like I've just put a little to do here so that we could think about that in the future if we wanted to do this in a more naive way, if you will. And then of course it brings the question, how are we going to get incoming emails? Because if a user is getting emails from some external source, we're going to have to show that in their inbox. And generally there are two strategies for this. You can have what we call a webhook, or some way of posting things. In other words, let's say that you use the third party that actually receives the email into their service. Then usually what you can do is that you can actually provide a webhook of some sort, which is basically just a trigger that says that, hey, when this person is receiving an email, can you post that email to this endpoint? And then we could do something like this. We could add an endpoint that this email would be dispatched to, and if that email is, this endpoint, we would just configure in that external tool, and they will send the email to our system, and then we would just save it into the database, and it would be shown in the user's inbox. That's one approach. Another one is to use polling, where we have another batch job like this that simply connects every X amount of seconds to the external database or the external system or the external API, whatever you want, and tries to see if there are new emails. So it just continuously checks, okay, are there new emails? Are there new emails? Etc., etc., etc. These are the common strategies to do this, but since we are not actually going to put this entire application into production and try to hook it up to live systems and stuff like that, it's not really necessary for us to do all of that extra work. So that's about it really. So now we have created a batch job, and if we wanted to actually wire this up to a real system, we would simply have to find a email service provider or some provider like that, and yeah, basically implement the email service provider, their APIs with the tokens, and set up the account and all that stuff, and this would pretty much work out of the box, or it would work as is. Cool, so next up we will have a look at bugs and a little bit of the considerations when we deal with bugs. So let's have a look at that.